As we wait on Framber Valdez, the Orioles are casting a wide net in their pitching search, now reportedly interested in Lucas Giolito. We'll talk about him coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, January 30th, 2026, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Orioles' reported interest in another free agent right-handed starter. That is the veteran Lucas Giolito. We'll talk about whether it would be worth it for the O's to bring in Giolito at this point, where would he slot into their rotation, and what his 2025 season looked like coming off of elbow surgery. Then we'll chat a little bit about some minor leaguers that the Orioles released this week, and finally a little more chat on Ryan Mountcastle and what the trade market would actually look like if the O's are still trying to shop him around at this point in the offseason. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Before we get there, though, just did want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day and making the Locked On Network now the #1 sports podcast network. So let's start with Lucas Giolito. Jon Heyman has been all over the Orioles reports this week as we kind of just sit back and wait for Framber Valdez's free agency decision as we inch towards February here. And we are just a little over a week from WBC playing pitchers and catchers, reporting to Orioles spring training on February 9th, and the top 5 starting pitcher on the market. And the last player, that's the best player left, I should say, in Valdez, still is not signed, and we know the Orioles have some interest. But for whatever reason, as I talked about on yesterday's show, we talked about the O's reported interest in Zach Gallen as a free agent starter. Whether it's that Valdez thinks he's worth more money in years than any team, including the Orioles, is willing to give him, whether it's the O's and others are worried about the character concerns we saw in Houston in 2025, whether it's a combination of a bunch of things. I'm sure that's what the reality is here, that Valdez still has not signed. I know he has suitors out there, including the O's. It is smart for the Orioles to be talking to the agents of other free agent starting pitchers because, quite frankly, none of them are going to give you the ceiling or even the floor that Framber Valdez would. He is clearly the best starting pitcher left on the free agent market. I really don't think there's any arguing that. Maybe some people would take Team Zach Gallen there, but that's just not the case, especially off the poor 2025 that Gallen had. But even if the Orioles can't get Framber, whether it's via another trade or another free agent signing, even after acquiring Shane Baz and re-signing Zach Eflin, I think the O's still need one more starting pitcher. Now, if you don't get Valdez, there might not be someone who slots in at, number 1 or 2 in your rotation. But getting more depth and more innings from a veteran guy would still be important for the O's. And that's why they need to keep looking around, even if they aren't going to get Framber. So that brings us to the latest report. Jon Heyman reporting on Friday that the Orioles reportedly are at least considering and showing interest in 31-year-old right-handed pitcher free agent Lucas Giolito. Again, kind of the same reported interest in Gallen, same interest we saw reported in Justin Verlander from the Orioles a couple of weeks ago. And these are all second-tier guys. Now, I would rank them in this order: Gallen, Verlander, Giolito, in terms of who I think the Orioles should go and get if they can't get Framber, with Zach Gallen the only of the 3 being the one that I would be kind of okay with, where, as I talked about again on yesterday's episode, if they signed Gallen, I'd be like, all right, good offseason. Maybe missed on the top starting pitcher, but he's got an upside here. When I talked about Verlander a couple weeks ago, I was like, look, if the Orioles hadn't yet signed Zach Eflin, I'd be totally down for Justin Verlander. And I feel the same way about Lucas Giolito. If the O's didn't have Eflin, I'd be like, yeah, perfect, veteran guy to put in your number 4 or 5 spot, eat some innings, give you some upside, would love it at the back end of this rotation. But when you get Eflin and you already have a guy like Dean Kramer, it just kind of feels like overkill at the end. Now, would a signing like that, like Giolito, make the Orioles better? Yes, it would give them another veteran starter. It would absolutely make the team better tomorrow if they made the move than they are today. But I'm not sure it moves the needle enough and doesn't even move the needle as much as Gallen would, or as much as obviously Framber would, or even some of these other guys who are on the trade market. Again, if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, this is my kind of starting pitching spreadsheet I've been working from all offseason. And as you can see, of my free agent mid-rotation starters available, Chris Bassett 2, Zach Gallen at 3, Justin Verlander at 5, Lucas Giolito at 7, Zach Littell at 9, and Nick Martinez at 10 are the guys who are left out there, with, of course, Fromber still being out there, part of the top of the rotation list. I had him number 4 out of the 5 pitchers on that list. And I kind of did my cutoff at Bassett and Gallen of guys who I think would really meaningfully improve the rotation. We haven't even seen the Orioles be linked to Chris Bassett at this point. Giolito I have just below Eflin, who the Orioles already signed to a 1-year, $10 million deal. I even have him below Justin Verlander. So the question is, why? 31 years old, Giolito has spent the last 2 years with the Boston Red Sox. In the offseason after 2023, when he had a really weird season, Giolito did in 23. He began the year with the White Sox. They were terrible, but he was okay. They shipped him off. The Angels grabbed him at the deadline. He was terrible there. Then the Angels did that weird thing in 2023 where they kind of put everyone on waivers right before September to try and get under the luxury tax. And the Guardians ended up picking up Giolito, who made 6 pretty bad starts for Cleveland down the stretch. And it turns out, well, there may have been a little injury there in the second half for Giolito, because he did sign a 1-year deal with the Red Sox that offseason with a player option for 2025 that could have turned it into a 2-year deal. And he got to spring training and immediately he had elbow pain. And in mid-March, before we even got to opening day, Giolito had elbow surgery in 2024. Now, it wasn't the full Tommy John. It was the internal brace surgery, which is like kind of Tommy John light. It's not as invasive. The recovery timeline is shorter than Tommy John, but it does the repair to the UCL similar to what Tommy John surgery does. So he gets that in March. Obviously, it ends his 2024 season, but with a goal of being ready for opening day of 2025. He picks up his player option because why would you not? He got $19 million to come back to the Red Sox in 2025, whereas he would have gotten very little as a free agent still recovering from Tommy John. And he wasn't ready for opening day, but it wasn't too bad. He made his Red Sox debut on April 30th of 2025, so only missed about a month of the next season before he was back from surgery. And that month of April and May, he was very up and down in the Red Sox rotation. He was trying to kind of knock the rust off, but he got to June. He began June with one of the worst starts of his career, gave up 7 runs in an inning and 2/3. Came back out there on June 10th, threw 6 scoreless innings, and he was off from there, looking like kind of vintage Lucas Giolito. From June 10th through the end of the year, Giolito made 19 starts through 111 and a third innings and posted a 2.54 ERA out of that Red Sox rotation. He was quietly one of the starters that really helped push Boston into the postseason in 2025. He kind of did it under the radar because obviously his teammate Garrett Crochet was making a Cy Young push, but Giolito was kind of quietly their number 2 guy through most of that season. Now, it came with some stuff you get a little worried about, right? Even though it was a 2.54 ERA, it was a 3.97 FIP and a 4.70 expected ERA. So there was clearly some good luck in there. When you pair it with a kind of low 20% strikeout rate and a kind of high 10% walk rate, you're like, this might be smoke and mirrors. But at the end of the day, what matters most when you're in a playoff race in that moment is not giving up runs, is run prevention. And Giolito did a great job. Only 5 starting pitchers from June 10th to the end of the year in baseball who were qualified had a lower ERA than Lucas Giolito. Who were the 5? Well, Trevor Rogers was number 1. We know the kind of season he had. Number 2 was Paul Skeens. You may have heard of him, Cy Young winner. Number 3 was Christopher Sanchez. May have heard of him, second in the Cy Young. Number 4 was Tarek Skubal. You might have heard of him, Cy Young winner. And number 5 was Nick Pivetta, who had an awesome season after signing with San Diego last year. Those are the only 5 who had a better ERA in that stretch when Giolito kind of got right to the end of the season. So that should say, hey, that's pretty good stuff. But again, there was a lot of good luck and a lot of smoke and mirrors. To have that big of a gap between your ERA and your FIP and your expected ERA, to have a strikeout rate that was much lower and a walk rate much higher than any of those 5 pitchers who were above him in that ERA category, it tells you he wasn't really in their league. despite putting up some good results. He ran a 244 BABIP, batting average on balls in play, when league average is around 280. That tells you he's getting good luck. He had a low home run rate despite not being really a ground ball pitcher. He's a fly ball pitcher, gives up a lot of fly balls, but he had a low homer rate. That is some good luck baked into Giolito's season as well. And if you just pull up his StatCast page, right, like all the data for the entire season, really nothing looked good. It's a lot of blue sliders on that StatCast page, which is what you don't want, except for his extension down the mound, which he's always been good at throughout his career. Like anything specific to the 2025 season, it's not something that you want to look at. Like the FanGraphs expected ERA for the season, or excuse me, the expected ERA for the full season, 5.06, right? It's not quite where you want to be from the Lucas Giolito year. He still, pitched 26 starts, 145 innings, and a 3.41 ERA. I mean, you'll take that. But when you're thinking about signing a guy as a free agent, you're not looking as much on last year's raw numbers. You're looking at how do his underlying numbers project for what he'll be for the Orioles in 2026 or 2027 or whatever it may be. And those things don't look nearly as good, which is why I'm bringing them up. Now, maybe something can be said for the fact that he did tail off late in the season. He walked 18 batters over his final 5 starts of the year, and his command was just completely lost there in September. After he made a pretty bad start on September 23rd, he was then shut down for a bit with an elbow injury. Didn't go on the injured list because there was less than 15 days left in the season. Red Sox wanted to keep him eligible for the postseason, so they just kind of shut him down for the rest of the year while keeping him on the roster. And then a week later, right before the playoffs started and the Red Sox were in the wild card series, they announced that Lucas Giolito would miss the entire postseason with an elbow injury. Not good for a guy that, a year and a half earlier had gotten elbow surgery on his UCL. Now, that really makes you worry that some sort of re-injury and another surgery is possible. Now, Giolito did come out and say, and the Red Sox said it as well, it was more of like flexor tendon and bone issues around the elbow, not specifically another UCL thing, which is a good sign. And Giolito says he feels fine now. Reportedly, he's at least been throwing this offseason. He thinks he's healthy. Teams obviously have interest in him. But all that stuff still worries me a lot. His stuff plus of 92 was a major drop-off in 2025, especially his kind of bread and butter four-seam fastball. His velocity at 93, pretty normal for Giolito, but the shape got worse on the pitch. It wasn't doing as well, wasn't fooling hitters as much, wasn't getting as much swing and miss. And yet he threw more fastballs than ever. That's not abnormal for a guy in his first year coming off Tommy John to throw kind of less breaking balls. His slider was really his only good swing and miss pitch. He's always had a good changeup, but he kind of backed off that pitch and threw it less in 2025. Again, it's all with the background of it's his first season back from elbow surgery, but still not exactly what you want to see despite the generally low ERA. And that's why it's important to just dig beyond what a guy's ERA is for a season. Now, for the big picture, he's a veteran arm who's, been good in the past, and he would be nice depth. And again, if the Orioles signed Lucas Giolito to a one-year deal tomorrow, it's not like I'd be upset. The Orioles would be a better roster for doing that. He would give them more starting pitching depth to protect against the injury collapse this rotation had in 2025. Those would be good things. The reason I would be a little annoyed would be that, well, that's going to be it, right? If they sign Giolito, it's not like they're adding another pitcher after that. There's just not room on the roster really to do that. And so you're kind of done fiddling with your rotation, and it would feel like they needed to do more, right? That's the negative part of this. And there's a little bit of he could crash and burn or even still be injured, just going off of what happened at the end of last year. Now, if they got the 2019 to 2021 White Sox version of Lucas Giolito, who had a 3.47 ERA with good underlying data in 72 starts in those 3 seasons, well, that would be nice to have. But that was now 5 years ago. Even the, June to August version that we saw of Giolito this year would be fine. Even if he outperforms his underlying data, if you sign him to a 1-year contract, you just need him to beat out those peripherals for 1 year and then let him walk and reap the rewards of him having a good ERA. You're more concerned if you sign him to a multi-year deal than a 1-year deal. But even those underlying things makes you think even 1 year may not be so good. And again, I've never been a huge fan of Lucas Giolito as a pitcher. And now with potential re-injury, I'd just kind of rather not. So, who knows where this news is coming from with Heyman connecting the O's to Gallen one day and then Giolito the very next. Is it the Orioles feeding him this information? Is it the agents of the pitchers feeding this info to John Heyman? What is the angle from other side to do that? And truly, we're kind of at the point of who the heck knows what is going on with Framber Valdez right now. He's the best pitcher out there. The Orioles have serious interest. They may even have a final offer out there to Valdez. We just kind of don't know. So it's good and smart for the Orioles to be checking in on kind of the non-Framber free agent options, as most teams just kind of wait for the top free agent out there to finally make his decision. For the Orioles, though, even signing another pitcher may not end the moves that they could make this offseason. Since the O's signed Pete Alonso, we've all kind of assumed, hey, either Ryan Mountcastle or Coby Mayo is getting traded this offseason. And yet we're here January 30th, and they're still both on the roster. Let's talk about one of those reasons that could be the case coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. So for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. So let's talk about Ryan Mountcastle a little bit, right? Orioles signed Pete Alonso to a 5-year, $155 million deal back in December. And it became pretty clear the Orioles probably aren't going to roster 3 right-handed hitting first basemen because they already had Ryan Mountcastle and Coby Mayo on that roster. So it took about 2 days of Alonso celebration till we immediately pivoted to what are the O's going to do? Are they going to move one of these 2 first basemen? And they have a little flexibility because Mayo was a third baseman coming up. He was a third baseman when he debuted in the big leagues in 2024. The Orioles just kind of moved him to first base full-time in 2025 because, candidly, the defense, especially the throwing arm and the accuracy of it, was so bad over there at the hot corner. Now, there's always a chance the Orioles could move Mayo back to third. There's always a chance they could try to play him in right field. It's something prospect analyst Eric Longenhagen over at Fangraphs has kind of always wanted for Coby Mayo. I've kind of been on board with that. That could fit with this roster, maybe putting him in the outfield. And Mayo does have minor league options remaining this year. So while it would stink for him and kind of for the Orioles to do it, they could just option Mayo down to AAA Norfolk again to begin the year, keep Mountcastle as a bench bat, and obviously have Alonso be your everyday first baseman. It is a legitimate possibility. I still think they're going to make a move with one of these guys, or at least try to. But if they can't do it, you're not just going to give them away for nothing. Right, you're not going to give away Coby Mayo, one of your top prospects very recently, for nothing. You're going to hold on to him and try and extract some value, change the position, whatever it may be. And that's why I've also said, like, hey, Mayo has much more trade value than Mountcastle. He's younger, he's cheaper, he's got more team control. He had a better offensive season in 2025. But he's still not the easiest player to trade right now because it's been some struggles that we've seen from him really since he debuted in the big leagues. On a flip side, it could be quote unquote easier to trade Mountcastle because you're not looking for nearly as much in return, and you could just kind of salary dump him for a lesser prospect or an up-down relief arm or whatever it is, right? Making that deal work could be a little bit easier. But again, the serious scenario where both of those guys are just on this team on opening day. And I wanted to talk about the Mountcastle part of it because I've even talked about it like this on this show, and many others have as well, that I think the assumption is the Orioles are going to find something, whatever it is, that they can get for Ryan Mountcastle and just move him off the roster and kind of go from there. And there are teams that still need right-handed hitting first base help. And as bad as Mountcastle was in 2025, in his career before that, since debuting in 2020, he'd been a pretty good hitter who mashed lefties. And, you know, he's still young and he still has good exit velocities and stuff under the hood looks okay and can absolutely still help a Major League Baseball team. Other teams beside the Orioles would want Ryan Mountcastle right now. I think we know that. But how much do they want him versus what else is out there? Because, we had a report this week that the Rockies, who have been adding some players, are still looking for some help over at first base. That's a team that I could see Mountcastle kind of getting his career back on track with. And if you look at the FanGraphs projections, Diamondbacks, Padres, Marlins, Twins, Reds, etc., like still need help at first base. Teams that may even want to compete in 2026 that are going to need some help there. Unfortunately for the Orioles, there are still right-handed hitting first basemen who could even be platoon types who are still out there as free agents, right? Ryan Mountcastle is due to make just shy of $7 million in 2025. He is kind of sort of a rental, but the Orioles did add a $7.5 million team option on for him for 2027. So it gives you, and I talked about it at the time, it makes him a little more tradable, gives him a little more trade value because if a team picks him up, they'd have an option for it being a 2-year deal on pretty cheap, and they can make the decision whether to keep him or let him go depending on his 2026 form. But those are the guys out there. And if other teams are willing to pay up to, 1 year, even close to $10 million more than Mountcastle is going to make to just have a 1-year stopgap at first base, they don't really need to trade for Ryan Mountcastle because Rhys Hoskins, Paul Goldschmidt, Nathaniel Lowe, Justin Turner, Miguel Andujar, Ty France, these are all guys who are available as free agents and are at least comparable in ways to their production to Ryan Mountcastle. Now, I think everyone would rather have Kobe Mayo than any of those guys because he's younger and has way more team control. But if you're another team, unless you are so cash strapped that you don't want to pay anything for a free agent, would you rather give up something of substance? Because I don't think the Orioles are going to want to get just nothing back for Ryan Mountcastle. They'd rather just use him as a bench bat than get nothing. So give up some sort of prospect or relief arm of substance for Mountcastle, especially if you're a contending team. Or would you rather just give $10 million to Paul Goldschmidt? Or would you rather just give, $8 million to Nathaniel Lowe or $5 million to Justin Turner or hope Rhys Hoskins has a bounce back season? These are all guys who at times at their peaks were better players than Ryan Mountcastle was, right? And guys who are older. I mean, Mountcastle is the youngest player of that group of guys I mentioned, so he has that going for him. And it's not like he's super expensive, but is it worth it, right? I mean, again, maybe that team option helps Mountcastle's value, but I think I'd take Goldschmidt, Lowe, and Turner just right now over Ryan Mountcastle, really. And the argument, again, can be made that Mounty's younger, has the higher ceiling than anyone else here, but would giving up an arm for another team be worth it? And that's what the Orioles would be looking for, even like a AAA depth arm that could maybe help them. I think it would be kind of the perfect trade package for the Orioles for Mountcastle. Is another team willing to give that up when they could just use that arm and just pay, again, $8 million to Nathaniel Lowe to do similar things that Ryan Mountcastle would do? That's questions that other teams have to ponder, and it's probably making it pretty hard right now for the Orioles to actually make a deal involving Ryan Mountcastle and clear him from the roster. Because yes, the Orioles have the money where they could just eat Mountcastle's contract. They could just say, hey, we'll give you Ryan Mountcastle. We'll pay the entirety of the $7 million that he is owed in 2026. Basically, you won't have to pay him anything. In return, you just give us a prospect to make it worth it for us to pay $7 million for a guy who's not going to be on our roster. That's a possibility as well. And I really think that's the only way at this point the O's are going to deal Mountcastle. They deal him to a team that is maybe not willing to spend the $8 to $10 million on the veteran free agent like Justin Turner or Paul Goldschmidt, and has a either strong not cap but luxury tax situation like the Padres, or is a team that's not willing to spend any money at all, basically like the Marlins, and they just say, yeah, we'll give you this interesting relief prospect if you can give us basically a free Ryan Mountcastle, who we could even have for 2 years if we're willing to pay him $7.5 million next year when we have a little more money. And we think that Mountcastle, he was bad last year, but we think he'll bounce back to what he was for the 2, 3, 4 years before that and could be a productive hitter for us. I think that's really the only way the Orioles get this done. So maybe the Reds or the Marlins or the Padres fit that. They can get something done, but it's looking less and less likely that a deal kind of in that sense would actually be made by the Orioles. But I certainly think they're going to try, because it's a weird roster spot right now with Alonso, Mountcastle, and Mayo all being there. Speaking of minor leaguers, this is one thing that happens every year as we get closer and closer to spring training. There's a certain amount of players you can have there on the major and the minor league level, which usually leads to some minor leaguers being released. 7 of them were cut loose by the Orioles this season. We'll give them one last farewell to finish off the show coming up next. So the Orioles released 7 minor leaguers this week, and just wanted to, as I do pretty much anytime the Orioles release a minor league player, just bid them farewell and wish them luck in whatever comes next, whether it's signing with another team, affiliated ball, independent ball, coaching, or it's just working in something completely different. Thank them for their time in the Orioles organization. First up is 23-year-old right-handed pitcher Simón Leandro. He was a 2023 international signing by the Orioles out of Venezuela. Got to Delmarva in 2025, posted a 6 ERA in 30 innings of relief, and he was released this week. Actually, his twin brother, Jose, was also an Oriole for a time, was released by the O's in the minor leagues after the 2024 season, and now Leandro is a free agent as well. 21-year-old right-handed pitcher Brian Bautista was also released, 2021 international signing out of the Dominican Republic. Finally got his first chance in Delmarva in 2025, but walked 20 batters and an 8.22 ERA in 23 innings of relief. 23-year-old right-handed pitcher Eddie Alberto was a 2022 international signing by the O's out of the Dominican Republic. Was actually pretty good when he got to Delmarva in 2024, had a 4.34 ERA and a 29% strikeout rate, but he missed the entirety of the 2025 minor league season with an injury, and now he is a free agent. Next up is 23-year-old right-handed pitcher Jacob Stretch, who was a undrafted free agent signing by the Orioles out of Virginia Tech after the 2024 MLB draft. He pitched a little bit in Delmarva last year, had a 3.29 ERA in 13 2/3 innings, but he did not even pitch until July. He was out early in the season with injury, came back. Maybe the Orioles didn't see exactly what they wanted to in his recovery process, and he hits free agency as well. Next 3 guys, probably a little more surprising that they were released. The first one was 27-year-old left-handed pitcher Walter Pennington. Orioles initially got him in April of 2025 when they claimed him off waivers from the Rangers. He had previously debuted in the big leagues for the Rangers and the Royals in 2024. He was the trade return that the Rangers got when they dealt away Michael Lorenzen at the 2024 deadline. Orioles had him on the 40-man for a bit. They DFA'd him in May, but he cleared waivers and stayed in the organization. He threw just 21 2/3 innings in relief in the minors in 2025, a little bit in AAA, but mostly in AA, and then did not pitch after July 26th due to injury. He's had a lot of injury concerns, multiple surgeries in his career, and I'm not sure, but there may have been another one to end his season this year. Next one is 23-year-old right-handed hitting outfielder Jake Cunningham. Orioles drafted him in the 5th round out of Charlotte back in the 2023 draft. He spent all of last season in High A Aberdeen. It didn't go well. He hit just 206 with an 83 WRC plus. He struck out 33% of the time, which is really, really bad for a guy only in High A. Had a bunch of tools. There were people inside the system really high on Cunningham, but had some injury issues throughout his career. Never really put the approach together at the plate. And a little bit surprising to give up on him this early, but the Orioles did release him. And then the final and probably best known name in this group released was 27-year-old right-handed hitting outfielder Hudson Haskin, who was the highest draft pick of this group. He was a 2nd-round selection by the Orioles out of Tulane in the COVID-shortened 2020 MLB draft. He made it to AAA in 2023, was pretty good there to end the season, went back to Norfolk in 2024, but that's when the injuries continued to pile up. He kind of stalled out there due to injuries and underperformance, was kind of splitting time between AA and AAA last year, where he had just a 64 WRC plus and also spent a chunk of the season on the injured list again in 2025. He kind of had the herky-jerky Hunter Pence-like swing, but had all the tools. There was good exit velos, good defense. The Orioles liked him. He was a bit of an underslot guy in the 2nd round to save some money, and that money eventually went to the likes of Kobe Mayo and Carter Baumler later in that 2020 draft, but he was a good talent coming out of Tulane. He just never fully put it together offensively, and the biggest issue for him were he had injuries almost every season that just kind of ravaged his career. Tough breaks for Hudson Haskin. We, of course, wish him the best. If he does sign on with another team and try and continue his career. He was one step away from the big leagues with the Orioles, and hopefully he can find that step in the future with another organization. We wish all 7 guys the best, of course, in whatever comes next in their baseball careers or in life. That'll do it for today's episode and this week on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure, remember, if you like Locked On Orioles, you love the content going here. We're getting closer and closer to opening day. Heck, we're less than 2 weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training and really getting things going here. So if you really like the show and you want more, you can sign up for the Everydayer Club. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. You can get Locked On Orioles ad-free. You can get members-only Discord access in the Discord right now, talking O's with me and other Orioles fans, and more. Just head to lockedonorioles.supercast.com. The link will also be right here in the show notes to join the Everydayer Club. And if you're liking the show as well, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. If you are a listener, make sure to subscribe, follow the show wherever you listen. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, 5-star rating, and a review. That really, really helps out the show as well. Unless there's big breaking news, Framber Valdez or another pitcher over the weekend, I will be back on Monday. We flipped the calendar to February next week, and that means we are back on the regular schedule. Yes, earlier than ever, we are returning to the 5 episodes per week, Monday through Friday, starting next week, all the way through really the winter meetings, if they even happen in 2026. We've got pretty much episodes every day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, right here on the Locked On Orioles podcast. So lock back in for next week. We're going 5 days a week. We will kind of finish out our player review series from Orioles from the 2025 season and really start to look ahead to spring training being right around the corner here in 2026. Also, I believe tomorrow is my 6-year anniversary since my first ever episode hosting Locked On Orioles back in late January of 2020. So thank you to everyone who has followed along so far, and hopefully this will be our best season yet here on the podcast and on the field for the Orioles. But back on Monday. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.